My name is Jennifer, otherwise known as Alindria on Ravelry or Alindria Knits on Instagram. And I'm going to tell you why you should consider knitting your stranded colorwork socks inside out. And then I'm going to show you how to do it. So let's get started. Okay, first, why should you knit your stranded colorwork socks inside out? Well, the main reason is that it is going to make the sock much more stretchy. If you're familiar with stranded colorwork knitting at all, you know that when you have floats, it limits the stretch on your colorwork. Now, for things like sweaters or cowls, that may not be such an important thing, but when it comes to your socks, you need to be able to get them on over your heel. That's usually the tough spot. So what you want is a stranded colorwork sock that is still stretchy. Now, I've knit this colorwork sock inside out, and I'm going to show you. I can stick my hand in there, and I can stretch that out. There's still quite a bit of stretch. Now, there are 3 main ways you can introduce stretch into your sock. But today I'm going to show you the one that really made a difference in my knitting between my first pair of stranded colorwork socks to my current pairs. When you're knitting a stranded colorwork sock, you are essentially creating a second layer with those floats, a second layer of fabric, which I will show you here. All of these floats create a second layer. And when you're knitting the sock right side out with your floats on the inside, no matter how much you keep your stitches spread out on your needles, those floats are going to have a smaller circumference than the outside of the sock. So when you knit the sock inside out and your floats are going around the outside, your floats are going to have a greater circumference than the outside of your sock. This introduces just a little bit more yarn into your sock, which means it will stretch more. Now, knitting the sock inside out will help you no matter what needles you're knitting on. It doesn't matter whether you're knitting on double pointed needles, using magic loop, 2 circulars, or a 9-inch circular needle. You flip that sock inside out, your floats will have more yarn. I'm going to show you how to do this on magic loop, but the process will be similar on the other needles as well. Aside from the 9-inch circulars, you won't have to do the needle management that you will on the other needles. Okay, so to get started, you want to knit your sock up to the point where you're going to add your contrast color. Now, my first round on this particular pattern, I don't add my contrast color until over halfway. So I'm going to knit until it's time to add my contrast color. And then I'm going to add my contrast color and knit until the end of the first needle. And if you're working on 9-inch circulars, you can just knit the first half before you flip it inside out. And if you're using DPNs, just knit to the end of the first needle, or the first needle after you add your color work. Okay, so here I've attached my contrast color, I've knitted the first stitches, and I've reached the end of the needle. So to flip it inside out, you're just going to look at the top. You're going to take your thumbs and push that cuff down inside. Now you have to rearrange your stitches. So you're going to turn it. Your next stitches are going to be along here because you just knit along this. So you're going to be knitting along here, but you're going to turn your needle. And instead of knitting on the side closest to you, like you might normally do, you're going to be knitting on the needle or the side furthest away from you. So I've pushed that needle in, and you may want to get any extra yarn out of the way. I've pushed that needle in, and then since I'm doing magic loop here, you push the far side needle in, and you're going to pull out the needle closest to you. Now, you have your two strands of yarn over here on the right-hand side, and you need to make sure they go around the outside of the sock. You don't want to get them trapped between the needle and then you start knitting, because then they'll be trapped on the inside. So you make sure they go underneath and around the outside of the needle. And then you get set up. And now you're just going to start knitting your pattern as normal, only you're going to be working on the back needle, on the side furthest away from you. And you'll be able to see your pattern develop here on the inside. It's not hard to see. You'll be able to see at least the last 5 rows or more as you're knitting it, so you won't lose your place or anything. Okay, so I'm just going to continue knitting. You may see me doing ladder back jacquard here, doing some setup stitches. I'm going to try to make another video about that. But I'm just trying to get over to where I'm actually doing some of the stranded color work. Okay, so I've gotten to the point where I'm adding some of that contrast color stitches. Again, you can see well what you're knitting. You can see your stitches right here on the inside because it's facing you and it's not hard to see. And you can see that you're just knitting how you would normally knit, only the sock is inside out. Okay, I've gotten to the end of this second needle, and now I need to turn my sock like I would normally do. So again, turn the needles, and now we push the back needle in. So we push the back needle in, and we pulled out the front needle. We make sure those yarns are going around the outside again. And we get set up. And then we continue with our pattern. So I hope you can see this, that it's pretty easy. After a while, you don't even think about knitting inside out. You're just doing it. And it just becomes kind of second nature. Now eventually, there are a few points where you will flip it right side out again to knit, such as when we get to the heel. And I will show you that coming up. So now we've knit the entire leg inside out, and now it's going to be time to knit the heel. Now this particular sock has a setup row for the heel. It's basically just a purl row, which I have already done. You can flip it right side out and then do the purl row, or do it while it's inside out. It doesn't matter. So once you're ready to knit the heel, just turn your sock right side out again. And then all I'm going to do is knit this heel, knit the heel flap, knit the heel turn, and then on the first row, the gusset, I'm going to keep it right side out because I think it's a little bit easier. So I will be back once I've got the heel done and show you how to do that gusset row and then work on it inside out again. Okay, so I am back. I've knit the heel flap and the heel turn, and I'm halfway through that knit row. I have to finish knitting this row and then start picking up stitches along the side of the gusset. A little bit about gusset charts. Now, if you've never knit a gusset chart before, it's going to be a different shape than your other colorwork charts. It's going to look a bit like a trapezoid. And if you don't remember your geometry, a trapezoid is going to have these two slanted lines with two parallel lines that are straight, but the bottom one is longer than the top. And this just is going to have your gusset decreases along the side. And now it totally depends on what pattern you're knitting, where it starts. Sometimes the gusset chart could start right in the middle of this heel, but then it's going to be a little bit shifted, like by one row, and it's going to look a little crazy. And I've knit patterns like that before. It's perfectly fine. But to keep it less confusing, I am not going to start the colorwork or the gusset chart until I get back to this side of the heel flap. So on this particular sock, and then probably on some of my other colorwork socks, I'll just be knitting here with the main color, picking up all the stitches on this side with the main color. And then I'll start back on the top of the foot with the main chart. And then when I get here, then I will start the gusset chart. And the gusset chart, the first row of the gusset chart, will be these picked up stitches along this side. And then we'll just continue doing the normal stranded color work as you continue across the gusset. And by the time you get back to this side, you will already be working on stitches that have already been picked up. Okay, so I'm going to finish knitting across here and picking up this side, and then we'll come back. And we're doing this first round of the gusset right side out just to make sure everything looks good, as in place, and there's no like loose stitches or anything like that. Hi, I'm back. It is another day because when I came back before to try to do this part of the video, practically as soon as I pressed record, the neighbors started playing very loud music, loud enough that it sounded like it was in the same room with me. So, okay, so let's get on with it. Now, I've picked up this side of the gusset in my main color, and like I said, we're just doing this first round with the sock right side out. We just want to make sure that these corners, as I like to call them, have a good tension on the yarn. And that's hard enough anyway, so there's no reason to try to do it with the sock inside out. So I will just continue to knit in pattern across the front of the sock here. And I will come back when I am at the other side of the gusset. Okay, so we're back on this side of the gusset, and we still have the sock right side out. So if you've never knit a colorwork sock before that had a gusset, It all depends on the pattern, of course, but sometimes you're going to be picking up those stitches in pattern according to the first stitches on the gusset chart. So for this, on the medium, I'm picking up a total of 17 stitches. And so I will just look at my gusset chart and see those first 17 stitches and then pick them up. Now, like I said, this isn't specific to inside out. Like we haven't switched back to inside out knitting, but I thought I might tell you a little bit about that in case you have not done this before on a Colorwork sock. So I like to sort of plan where I'm going to start by counting my stitches, and it should be, my first one should be right here in the corner. And this one has purl bumps that you're going to be picking up stitches in. And if you've never picked up in purl bumps before, it can be a little bit difficult occasionally to get your needle under those bumps and then pull up a stitch. So just go for whatever strand you can actually get under. Like, don't worry about it too much. It's not going to be visible in the end. And I am very sorry that this is in dark gray, but that's what I'm knitting the sock in. Yeah, seriously, I'm having trouble here. Like, sometimes people will use a small crochet hook to do this. It has to be pretty small, though, to get in those purl bumps. I've tried it. It didn't help me too much, but everyone has different experiences. There's not really, like, you can't really do this part inside out anyway. I mean, there's not much of an inside that even exists at the moment. So, and one round of slightly tighter floats is not a huge deal. And honestly, like I said, you usually struggle to keep them tight at these corners anyway. Or at least I do. It can be a little bit challenged to keep everything snugged up when you're doing the first couple rounds of the gusset. So once we get to the end of the gusset, we will flip the sock inside out again. Actually, when we get back to about the middle of the heel right here, we'll flip the sock inside out. So I will just continue on. Now, one more thing. On this particular design, my last stretch of stitches are all going to be in the dark gray. So if you're using ladder back to card or LBJ, I'm going to make another video on this and put a link to it down below, hopefully. You may have to add some ladder back stitches as you're picking these up. So you just have to be careful. I just added this one right here. That when you count your gusset stitches, you don't count your ladder back stitch, however you set it up. I think when doing the gusset, doing this backwards loop like I just did is probably the easiest way to set up that particular ladder. You know, it doesn't, I mean, if you're using a different way of starting your ladders, like, it doesn't matter if you have one that's different than the rest. Anyway, I'm just going to finish this up. So I only ended up needing to add one ladder during that pickup on the gusset. And then I'll just count my stitches to make sure I have my 17. And like I said, don't count your ladder stitch. And then I will just continue on knitting the first half of this heel. And I'm going to add another ladder stitch. And then once we get half of the heel knit, we can turn the sock inside out again. And I'll show you how the yarn works for that. Okay, halfway through the heel. Now it's time to get your needles arranged. I like to get each side of the gusset separate there. And now it's time to turn the sock inside out again. There's a lot going on here. Don't worry about that. Okay. Okay, so we have our sock inside out. And to be honest, the first few rounds of the gusset, this heel is going to be popping out like this. So every so often you just have to push it back in. So again, the most important part when you're switching between needles, so I have a little triangle here. So every time I go between these two needles or between this join and this join, you have to make sure both yarns go underneath the needle so that they don't end up getting caught and so that they stay around the outside, which will eventually be the inside. So I've knit the first half of the gusset right here, and then I have to knit the second half of the gusset. And it can be a little awkward. To be honest, it's a little awkward even if you're knitting it right side out. Like, I don't think you can do much about the awkwardness. It just exists. So, just knitting in pattern here. At this point, it's like it's not even inside out, right? As you develop more of the gusset, it'll be a little bit easier because it'll actually stay in like this. I often have it pop out, by the time I'm turning it to do the next portion. And I'm not having you do any decreases on this first round. I'm just having you get the pattern established. And if you knit some of my other colorwork patterns, they'll be I only have one at the moment, but I'm planning on making more. The next one will probably be the same way. I'll just be establishing the colorwork on this first round of the actual gusset chart. Okay, see how it popped out again right there? So just push it back in. And now we're gonna get ready to turn. So we'll just turn it, rearrange our needles because we're doing the front of the sock next. Pulling it that way, pulling this out. And again, the most tricky part are these first couple stitches. You do want to make sure to try to pull it right here at these corners, as I call them. I mean, you're still getting the extra yarn from knitting it inside out, but you don't want like huge gaping holes or anything. So you do have to watch your tension, especially on these first few rounds. And then you just knit the next part of your pattern. I'm not sure there's much more to tell you beyond that. You knit across this, and then you'll do the same thing. You'll turn it, rearrange your needles, and you'll just make sure your yarn comes underneath the needles to knit the start of the next row of your gusset. And like I said, once you get a few rows done, it gets a lot easier. So this is a technique that you can use on all of your Colorwork socks, and you can even knit your hats, your mitts, if they have stranded Colorwork, your sweaters, you can knit them inside out too, and that should help your float management and your tension to just keep it nice and even and no puckering. I only have one more thing to talk about knitting inside out. Now this sock has a solid colored toe. So once you get done with your Colorwork, so you'll flip the sock right side out again and you'll knit the toe regularly. However, if you are knitting a Colorwork sock that also has a Colorwork toe, you can still knit the first few rounds of the toe inside out, but you don't want to do too many because you need to be able to reach down in there and pull the sock right side out again while you can still fit the sock through the opening, because you don't want to knit the whole thing inside out and then suddenly your needles are trapped on what eventually becomes the inside and you need Kitchener and you're like, what am I going to do now? So, but those last rounds of the toe, it won't matter. You can knit them right side out. I mean, that's not a part that really has to stretch too much anyway. So basically, just flip it back and when you get to the toe and knit the rest of it right side out. So I hope that helps and happy knitting. Bye-bye.